first time in my career, I sat in my car and I cried. My first year as a nurse has brought me challenges and triumphs that I could never have imagined. I knew that signing up to work on the Draper PCU as a new grad was going to be difficult, but I could never have imagined having to tackle a global pandemic within that time frame as well. Navigating the fears of being a new grad, coupled with fears of a national PPE shortage, supporting patients fighting a deadly virus, and seeing news stories of frontline healthcare workers becoming infected and even dying, have molded my first year in more ways than I can even identify. I know we typically write these narratives about one specific patient experience that touched us and changed the way we practice nursing, but in light of the events of the past few months, I hope you'll indulge me as I reflect on more than one. My first COVID patient, a young woman, otherwise healthy, exposed on the train as she rode to work in Boston. This crazy virus we know nothing about, and she has it. She is scared, so scared. We have that in common. Her family works in medicine, her husband a nurse, her aunt a doctor, calling them throughout the day to ease their concerns as much as her own. She started with a little oxygen, then a little more, became more short of breath, more hypoxic. 2 liters, 4 liters, 6, changed to a venti, moved to the unit. Days and days of this, sleeping prone on her stomach, dyspneic, even just standing up to the bedside chair. Doing everything she can to avoid being intubated because she knew what that meant and she had kids at home to worry about. And she did it. She fought hard and she got better. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Our next COVID patient on Draper starts in a similar fashion. Young guy, no other medical history, works in construction, feels short of breath, getting worse, requiring more and more oxygen. But he's not as lucky as my first patient and needs the tube in order to breathe. His x-ray, a total whiteout. The virus works hard, but the ICU works harder, and over a week later, we extubate. I stand in the room with his primary nurse and a respiratory therapist, and we wait. He's the first one we've successfully extubated. We watch the numbers carefully. He speaks his first word, hi. Then he says some funny things about Mother Earth and the universe. You know how they can be after all that sedation. But he gets better. His breathing has improved, his mental status clears, and he's transferred to MP1. A few days later, he's our first code happy and makes a pretty memorable speech that brings many of us to tears. Maybe this virus isn't so bad after all. Then we get a slew of cases that all present the same way. All get intubated, most of whom have comorbidities, and I start to realize that not all are going to have happy endings. The ICU fills up, we turn Draper into extended ICU, and I start taking ICU level patients after some brief but helpful lessons from the amazing nurses in the unit. We start to see death. I watch as a woman who just lost her husband to COVID loses her son to it as well. A son who cared for his mother while she recovered from the virus, now dying from it himself. Patients who would never have had to come to the hospital if it weren't for this virus, leaving to rehab facilities after months in the ICU with a trach and a PEG tube. I watch approved family members walk onto the unit one at a time, donning gowns and masks, gloves and face shields to see their loved ones one last time. Every day, the number of deaths on the daily COVID report goes up. It hits nursing homes, and our patients are older, and many of their families unable to visit. And our incredible palliative care team starts to make phone calls to loved ones to discuss code status. CMO is not a foreign concept to Draper PCU in the ICU or many of you today. We've seen it before, and we will see it again. But the sheer number of patients who just couldn't continue to fight this virus has been astounding. I watch as many families, even those whose loved ones aren't infected with the virus, are understandably too afraid of it to come to the hospital, making the transition that much harder to witness. I watch patient after patient come to the ICU, fighting to maintain their breathing, have final discussions with family and doctor, make decisions on whether they want to be intubated or not, and begin the most difficult battle of their lifetime. I watch nurse after nurse sit by the sides of those patients, holding their hands, saying their prayers, crying with them, FaceTiming their families, providing the little comforts to make the transition easier, and providing the medicine when nothing else helps. My most recent COVID rule-out, a man in his late 70s, admitted after weeks of fevers and chills with worsening shortness of breath. We don't know if he has the virus yet, but he's visibly upset when he gets to the floor. I ask him if it's okay if I sit at the edge of the bed and explain to him why I'm wearing all of this strange gear, now a common practice of mine. I ask him how he's feeling and if he is in any pain. He tells me he feels lousy, and moreover, he's concerned about his wife. See, she was put on hospice 3 days ago for metastatic brain cancer and isn't expected to make it through the night. He has his cell phone in hand, awaiting the call. I sit with him and listen to a few stories about he and his wife, about their kids growing up, and the struggles of the past few weeks. With tears welling in his eyes, and secretly mine, he looks at me and says, 54 years of marriage, 58 years of being my best friend, and this is how it's going to end. With her at home, and me in the hospital during a pandemic, you almost have to laugh, but neither of us do. Every nurse has that moment. I've heard it hundreds of times. Someday something will hit you so hard that you'll get out to your car and you'll just sit there and cry. And I never believed them. Or maybe I thought I would be too strong, or would be the tough guy that I clearly am not, because that day came. I let it build day after day, week after week, months into the COVID-19 crisis. I got in the car after a 12-hour shift, and I thought about my grandfather when he passed away in the ICU at UMass a few years ago, and how awful it would have been if I couldn't have been there, holding his hand, and I cried. I thought about my grandmother, and how I would want to be by her side so badly if this were her right now, and I cried. I thought about the fact that I haven't seen my parents or brother or friends in 3 months because I'm afraid to bring this virus home to them, and I cried. I put myself in the shoes of a grieving son who couldn't be at the bedside of his dying mother, and the shoes of a husband who won't get to celebrate another anniversary, and I cried. I felt every emotion I had left in my body for those patients and their families, and I cried the whole ride home. But it's true what they say, these experiences make us better. We are human, and it's okay to feel these things. I want to thank every nurse who I've been lucky enough to work alongside for teaching me that nursing isn't about the heroic code blues or the funny stories we get to go home and tell our families. It's those moments where we can hang our hat up at the end of the day, knowing we did every little thing in our power to change a person's life for the better, and for teaching me that sometimes it's okay to get in the car and cry.